So we actually like carbon pricing. Cap and trade versus the carbon tax. There's been a lot of talk about gas prices these days. Obviously. I think we have it at the pump something like $1.60 or $1.70 here in Ontario per litre. More vicious prices elsewhere. I can't help thinking about the impact to come on air tickets or freight. So with this situation of rising prices, it's super surprising that most Canadians don't know as much as they want to about the price on carbon. The surveys say that Canadians also do not hate the idea of carbon pricing. There's a couple of turns to this story. So let's do some work and take a look. I'm Paul Burns, and this is Climate Action Matters. We're a fact-based discussion about climate change and Canada's transition from fossil fuels. We put people in touch with good information and point to the best ways of getting involved. Today, we'll take a look at the two types of carbon pricing, cap and trade and carbon tax. What are the carbon pricing arrangements? How do these things work? How often are they used? And what can we look forward to in this area in Canada? In a cap and trade approach, sometimes called emissions trading schemes, a marketplace is set up. A budget for something like carbon is distributed to companies in the sector, which is not administratively complex. And the portion of that total budget for the sector can be distributed to individual companies based on prior year emissions or performance, or even auctioned off at the beginning of each year. And the budget can be seen as a cumulative budget, or it can be renewed each year. Companies in the sector can reduce emissions by innovation or efficiencies. And those companies that have excess emissions budgets, can trade or sell them to other players in the sector. So if company X has room left in its carbon budget, it can sell that to another company, company Y, if it has spent all of its budget. A famous cap and trade example is the one used for acid rain back in the day. The sulfur dioxide allowance trading program was established in the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments and was the world's first large-scale pollutant cap and trade system. It was a big success and reduced SO2 emissions to below the original targets, so that by 2007, annual SO2 emissions have declined to below the program's 9 million ton goal. This was achieved despite an increase in electricity generated from coal during that same time period. So some economists prefer this method because there's less intrusion in the marketplace, and the market forces are set to ensure that the targets for overall emissions are reduced. A carbon tax is a tax directly on goods and services to make them more expensive. Some would say that the tax is maybe a best way to represent the true cost of a good in the marketplace, where many of the costs to the environment have been externalized or put to the future for the rest of society to fix. But by raising the price, the carbon tax reflects hidden costs. The price is added to the goods in the form of a tax, and it has two impacts. The new higher price reduces demand by some amount, and the tax results in additional government revenues, which could be put to some other purposes. The World Bank has this nice graphic to show that there's a carbon price being implemented all over the world. You'll see that there's lots of action in the EU, some parts of the Pacific, and here in Canada. They say that carbon pricing is rapidly expanding worldwide, and in many jurisdictions, US included, there's actually growing interest. As an aside, there's some good information on carbon pricing scheme in the EU from a group called Plan Up, and I'll have that link in the below. The price of gas at the pump is definitely affected by tax regimes in different jurisdictions. All over the world, this varies. And we know this when we talk about relatives or when we travel, and even in Canada, there are some good differences that can make you want to move your SUV from the West Coast to someplace a little further east. Carbon pricing, though, is popular in Canada. According to a recent survey, there's in 2018, most people, that's 78%, are supportive or open to the idea of a carbon price, although they add it's not their first choice. They prefer to see subsidies and new technology also. Most, that's 57%, think it will have a positive impact on the Canadian economy. But a very curious thing, the survey also found that we're not fully aware of what carbon pricing technically is. As of 2021, Canada has 14 carbon pricing schemes in place. There's examples of both carbon tax as well as cap and trade. A carbon tax appears to us as a surcharge on fuels, and these are active in almost every province and territory. In the notes below, I'll list all those provinces and territories, but it's for 90% of the Canadian population. Cap and trade and the related scheme called baseline and credit are most often applied to industrial emitters. They either set a baseline and credit system, including on performance standards and output-based pricing systems, or work by setting a cap on the total amount of emissions that can be released within a given jurisdiction. Almost all Canadian provinces and territories have some kind of cap and trade scheme in place. I'll add the list of those provinces in the below as well. There is an interesting thing about how cap and trade programs can be made to work across borders in an administratively easy way. So the cap and trade finance textbook says cap and trade can promote broad international participation and facilitates international harmonization and cooperation on climate policy. Well, that sounds pretty good. It does this by reducing the costs limited to emissions on a global basis. This is from Nathaniel Keohane in Climate Finance. You know what? That's exactly what's going on between Quebec and California. The Quebec Cap and Trade Program is linked to the California Cap and Trade Program through the Western Climate Initiative. And this means that cap and trade participants in Quebec and California can trade emissions credits with each other. This previously included Ontario, but that was cancelled by the current Conservative government. Well, the facts are in. It works. A study by the World Economic Forum showed that carbon pricing works. Well, it works pretty good. It showed that emissions grew less in those jurisdictions with a price on carbon than without a price on carbon. And perhaps this is promising, especially in the future as more and more jurisdictions climb on board with cap and trade schemes. It's one of those things that's essential, but by itself is insufficient. Carbon pricing works to lower or slow the increase of emissions. And Canada, as we know, presents a special problem. As one of the worst polluters per capita in the world, there is definitely a place for carbon pricing in Canada. Since we don't seem to hate them, I bet we'll be seeing more of them in the coming years. There is an opportunity here to use these financial incentive approaches creatively to focus businesses and consumers in the right direction when it comes to the transition from fossil fuels. We all know it has to happen way faster and at a way huger scale to address Canada's emissions problems. And we know it has to happen in coordination with many other efforts to reduce emissions. But hey, it's about tax, so therefore it's fun. Talk about it with your friends, write letters, ask your provincial legislators. Let it impact on your choices to avoid the tax by using lower carbon alternatives. Mostly, help make it normal to talk about climate change. As usual, the footnotes and the links are in the below. Press the subscribe button so you can see more of these videos, or use the bell to get reminders when new videos are available. Thanks for joining us here on Climate Action Matters.